Welcome to Connect Karo 2025 to the session on Solution Room, what works for MSMEs. I first hand it over to my colleague Vivek Venkatramani, who is the Associate Director with the Climate Resilience Practice Team, to set the context and just give the welcome address. Over to you, Vivek.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of WRA India, I'm really happy and it's my honor to welcome everyone to this very important session on building resilience of MSMEs to climate shocks. MSMEs are a very important part of the Indian economy. They're actually the sort of backbone of the Indian economy because of multiple reasons. They contribute to providing livelihoods, they drive innovation, they also contribute to the GDP in a very significant way across many states. But they're also the most vulnerable when it comes to increasing frequency and magnitude of climate shocks and uncertainties. It affects the worker productivity, health and safety. It also affects business continuity and the supply of materials across different levels. So this session is going to be sort of including a very distinguished set of panelists and speakers who are industry leaders, who are going to be practitioners, policy makers. And so we're going to have a session which focuses on not just identifying challenges with respect to building resilience of MSMEs, but also identifying those particular pathways which can sort of contribute to making them less vulnerable. And we are going to bring together these panelists from different backgrounds, and our idea is to sort of spotlight these solutions, not just from the point of view of what's currently working, what's not working, but also how it can be scaled up across different segments of the industry. So I'd like to thank all our speakers and panelists over here and also the audience for the continued engagement. I hope this discussion is very engaging and we can take some collective action towards making MSMEs more resilient. Thank you all.
Thank you, Vivek. Thanks for those, welcome remarks and kind of laying down the tone for what today's session is all about. WRA India has been working a lot with MSMEs. We have been doing a bunch of surveys. We have been engaging with MSMEs on the ground, trying to understand how, climate disasters like heat and flood actually impact people, businesses, productivity, supply chains, everything. And I invite my colleague Bhavna Ahuja to talk more on what WRA has been doing around this. So over to you, Bhavna.
Very, very good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As Ananya mentioned, let me just quickly take you through the kind of work that WRA has been doing over the last 2.5 years, and so, in understanding how the climate hazards, these extreme weather events are actually impacting the MSME. So I think we all know that MSMEs actually play a very, very important role in our economy, contributing to the employment, to the manufacturing output, the exports. And they're also equally important in achieving the India's climate ambitious, these goals, through emission reductions and all. But most importantly, these enterprises are also equally vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. We get to see that India is basically India is actually, sixth in terms of the climate risk index that we have. MSMEs are basically impacted by the heat in terms of the number of working hours which is being lost. The floods are basically impacting the MSMEs. In Chennai, we see in 2020-23, thousands of crores being lost. In 2015, the floods of 2006, which is still, being remembered by the textile industry in the Surat. So all this is basically making the MSMEs vulnerable. What WRI has been doing for the last couple of years, so we actually launched this initiative called RISE, that is Resilient, Inclusive and Sustainable Enterprises, way back in 2003. So this initiative basically aims to build the resilience and competitiveness of the MSMEs in the automotive cluster of Chennai and Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu and textile clusters of Surat in Gujarat, while enabling, an inclusive and just transition to the low carbon future through the ways of research, capacity building, dialogue engagement, and outreach. We actually aim through this project, through this initiative, we basically aim to support 1,000 workers and 100 MSMEs to manage the climate impacts, implement actions, and also gain the green skills. The approach is definitely multi-stakeholder here. So industry, finance, skilling, government actors, all are basically the part of the table in achieving this. Under this comprehensive initiative of RISE, there have been a number of activities which have been taking place, and one of the activities which we have been focusing on to actually build the adaptation and resilience is basically, trying to understand the risk and the vulnerabilities of the MSMEs across the clusters that we have been working. So in the last 1 year, what we have done is that we have, tried to survey about 310 MSMEs. So that was in Surat and Chennai and Coimbatore, basically to understand the climate perceptions and awareness, to understand, the exposure to the assets, the business continuity issues, the worker welfare part of it, to how the heat is impacting, the workers, and also in understanding the barriers and enablers to the adaptation. We have also actually did, a spatial mapping to understand the heat and flood risk situation, the heat and flood risk to the industrial clusters that we basically determine. We also did focus group discussion with the workers, and also basically did a lot of, consultations to understand, from the experts what they actually think. So, however, I think during basically, the survey, we determined a lot of things, understanding the fact that, awareness and sensitization is something which is definitely one of the major aspects when it comes to building the resilience of the MSMEs. We found that, how the workers are being impacted by the heat stress, the existing coping mechanisms which we found are very fragmented in nature, and the enterprise are definitely trying, but overall, I think the systemic enablers of finance, infrastructure, knowledge is something which is definitely missing. So in actually understanding and realizing all those factors and based on the ground situations, in an attempt to build the awareness part of it. So this year, in the first half of 2025, during the summer months, we thought it's very important to make these MSMEs and also the workers aware about, the heat issues. So there, what we did, we actually organized a couple of workshops to make the owners aware about the impact of the extreme heat on their operations, on their businesses, in also making them aware about how it impacts the workers, and also, the kind of low-cost solutions in terms of the active or passive solutions that they basically can adopt to do that. One of the important initiatives was basically, as you can see on the screen, this posters was basically developed for the workers, and these posters, about 1,000 posters have been distributed across 70 plus MSMEs, and they have been pasted in their enterprises. And they were for better access and understanding. I think they were actually printed in the regional languages of Hindi, Gujarati, and Tamil. So this is basically the posters that we built and distributed. I'll also play a very short video which will basically, show the kind of the work that we did when we were doing this heat stress awareness sensitization, the programs. So this is a short video that we actually prepared during for the workshops that we did. After the sessions, after the workshops that we did, we also got this wonderful opportunity to meet our Honorable Minister of MSMEs, Sri Jitin Ram Manji, and I think where he actually appreciated the work that RISE has been doing it over the couple of years, and we presented him the posters as well. There is a QR code also where when you will scan, you will get to see the blogs and the op-eds that we have been writing, and there are many more to come. The work that we have done, we will be soon releasing out the report also. So that will actually contain all these evidences and all in the next few months. So basically, the idea for today's solution room session, as Vivek pointed out, is very simple. We are bringing the MSME voices directly into the room. So we have two MSMEs today here from Surat and from Chennai. To understand their lived realities of dealing with the climate hazards, and then, leverage expert perspectives on how and what sort of actionable solutions can be suggested to their challenges. So I am delighted to actually introduce our two speakers, two MSMEs who are present here today. I will first call Dr. Vecharian VSP. Dr. Vecharian is basically the state president of Laghu Udyog Bharati and managing director of Shri KVS Industries Chennai. Sir has basically more than 2 decades of experience in dealing with the issues of the MSMEs, policies, and finance. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today. We also have a very young, entrepreneur here, Raghav Dalmia, director, Prayagraj Dyeing and Printing Mills. He's from Surat, Gujarat. Raghav has been driving innovations and operational excellence in the textile processing unit in Surat. So thank you, Raghav, for joining us here today. I would like to call my colleague Anjana Rajagopalan. She's a program manager at the Climate Resilience Practice Team at WR India to facilitate the session. Dr. Anjana, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Bhavna, for setting that context. And thank you, Dr. Vecharian and Raghav, for joining us today and taking out your precious time. I think Bhavna has already set the context of how important MSMEs are for India's economy in terms of contributing to its GDP, employment, as well as exports. And they're also increasingly becoming vulnerable to different kinds of climate risks. So, Dr. Vecharian, I would like to start with you. We see a lot of instances of frequent cyclonic incidences and flooding in Chennai. So when these floods hit the industrial clusters of Tamil Nadu, say for instance in the Michong cyclone event of 2023 or the event of 2015 before, what were some of the hardest challenges that your MSME faced? And since you're the president of the Laghu Udyog Bharati, the cluster as a whole, what kind of challenges do you think they faced because of these flood events? Was it damage to assets or loss of work days or a breakdown of the supply chains themselves? So could you throw light on these challenges and maybe also share some rough estimates to throw more light?
Yeah, good morning, one and all. As Madam told, I am Chilean, Laghu Udyog Bharati. This is Ban India organization. Around 70,000 members are in entire India. All MSME sectors are connected. In Tamil Nadu, around 3,500 members are there. We are the major contribution, 40% GST to the government. Everyone knows that. As Anjana Madam asked, how the flood is connected with all the MSMEs, there are 3 points I have to tell. One side is finance, then technology, and market access. The 3 type of challenges that all the MSMEs are struggled. The 2015, around 10 days, the flood was there in all Ambattur estate, entire Tamil Nadu, Chennai, entire MSME sectors are closely arrested. That there are the 4 points I can tell. One is that operational hub, entire supply chain stopped. There are a lot of OEMs in Chennai, lot of in Hosur, everywhere like Ashok Leyland, TVS groups, entire OEMs are stopped with that supply chain. And second thing, that the financial stress to the entire MSME sector was totally disturbed due to this flood. Over 1 month that the entire MSME sectors are not running because of all this flood and everything. On Ambattur Lake, Eri, all the MSME owners are sleeping in a house at around night 12 noon. That the entire lake is opened, the water is flooded in all the factories around that. This level water was blocked, the entire thing. There are a lot of companies are totally disturbed, that CNC, VMC machines are, total machines are flooded in the entire machine. So total entire MSME sectors are struggled at that period, actually 2015. The same another 5 years, 2020, 2013, continuously it is coming. So why that Ambattur estate is struggled, that North Pesna, that one railway crossing is that water, we are unable to sending the water to the canal. So immediately Laghu Udyog Bharati addressed that 2020 to the railway minister, that immediately minister addressed that issue. Now the canal call now we are operating that issue. So another 6 months it will sort it out that the entire that flood activities are problem will be solved. Then secondly, lot of North Indian laborers are stayed in top of the companies. So all the employees they struggled due to this flood, some food aspects, the salary aspect, MSME sectors are struggled totally. That OEMs are seeing some other suppliers to other states. So the business are totally disturbed to the entire MSME sectors during that period. Though this is the major phenomena for the flood. Due to flood, MSMEs are totally affected. Some 20,000 crores of business are affected due to this flood during 2015. This is the main issue, the flood activities, what Anjana is asking.
Thank you, sir. That's quite a huge number. And Raghav, similar question for you. We hear a lot about the rising impact of heat on industries, the temperatures during summer months even crossing 40 degrees Celsius. So how do you think it impacts the textile cluster in terms of impact on machines or human capital, worker health, productivity, and so on? And similarly, do you have any estimates of economic losses that you could provide us to, throw more light on the intensity of these challenges?
Sure. Thank you, Anjana. So in Surat, in the specific textile industry specifically, machines require a lot of heat to operate because the fabrics require those for their processing requirements. And the temperatures range from 130 degrees Celsius to 180 degrees Celsius. And that means radiation heat is already very high, and it takes skilled workforce to manage it. And if you combine it with insufficient ventilation, the result is lower productivity, rising break-even points, and constant pressures on margins. And similarly, worker efficiency, because of these things, falls by half. Workers start being absent, and that increases the pressure on the present workers at the factory facilities at that time. Furthermore, machines break down even more, and energy bills soar very high. Business viability itself is threatened, and by that extension, there's a loss of livelihood, and there's a risk of unemployment. The textile industry, I believe, is the second largest labor-intensive industry in India after agriculture, and that just shows the amount of people affected by the problem. I believe 35 million people are directly receiving their livelihood from the textile industry, and 100 million people indirectly.
Thanks, Raghav. I think both of you have really hit the challenges spot on, and that would be very useful for our next segment where we will be discussing about the possible solutions. But before that, Dr. Veerchayan, if since you represent the Laghu Udyog Bharati and you have an automotive unit of your own as well, if you had to pick one big fix or policy support that you would ask for, what would that one solution be?
Yeah. Actually, when we asked the government to support that whenever this flood time is there, immediately they sanctioned the subsidies for the machineries, what they addressed the machine breakdowns. And the insurance part of it, immediately our finance minister is addressed that issue. Within 1 week, they are sanctioned all the affected machineries insurances that they solved. For Laghu Udyog Bharati, they are supporting fully to our members, non-members, entire thing. Then 10% of the MSME affected units, they are giving some subsidy loans from the government of India. So that is a very much appreciation point. And regarding this Tamil Nadu government, that power cost, they adjust around 1 month. We are not putting that power cost. After that only they are charging that power cost also. It is very much useful to the entire MSME sectors. These are all the association point of view. We asked the government, they also agreed and do the needful for that.
Okay, and similarly for you, Raghav, do you think MSMEs in Surat are adapting well enough? Are they taking up cooling solutions, ventilation, worker safety measures? Do you think the city has its own heat action plans? Does that help you out in any way? if you had to ask for solutions, what could be one small short-term solution and what could be one long-term solution that would ask?
Sure. The way I see it, the problem of heat has two dimensions to it. There's financial constraints and education. So firstly, talking about education, due to lack of proper information, MSMEs have accepted that heat is a status quo in the manufacturing industries. Even when MSMEs are willing to act, they often don't know where to start. Should they invest in exhausts or insulation or new ventilation designs? What is cost effective and what is not cost effective? We need sector-specific guidelines and that is backed by research that give MSMEs a clear roadmap. Without that, there will just be piecemeal solutions that only bring about temporary respite. And secondly, covering the financial constraints. And I think today MSMEs are operating in an ever-changing, volatile business environment with unpredictable global markets and shrinking margins. In Surat's textile industry, the break-even points are rising rapidly, and that causes people to focus a lot on capital expansion just to survive in the market. In these conditions, upfront investments or retrofitting or redesigning factories is such a big investment that MSMEs are not able to support that well. Support from government through subsidies, low interest financing, and targeted incentives for cooling would go a long way. Furthermore, these are short-term fixes that would really help bring about change. But in the long term, more supportive and coercive policies would help take it a notch further.
Thanks. Thank you both, Dr. Veercharian and Raghav, for joining us today and for setting around these challenges, whether it be in terms of worker health or supply chain or financial constraints. So I think the next segment that we have on the solutions room with a panel of experts, you would be able to come up with some feasible solutions.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah. Over to you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Veercharian. Thank you, Raghav, and thank you, Anjana, for bringing out the challenges. We now basically transition to our major segment, which is expert panel discussion on pathways to MSME resilience. Joining us are distinguishing experts across academia, policy, practice. I would like to first call Dr. Vidya Venugopal, Professor Sri Ramachandra Institute of Higher Education and Research. Dr. Vidya has done an extensive work on occupational heat stress, industry hygiene, and she has been there with us in the workshops as well. Thank you, Dr. Vidya, for joining us today all the way from Chennai. We also have a very special guest, Dr. Giriraj Ambarnath. Dr. Giriraj is basically the research group leader, Water Data for Climate Resilience International Water Management Institute. Dr. Giriraj has joined us all the way from Sri Lanka. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today. Dr. Giriraj has an extensive experience of working in the areas of water resource, risk management, disaster risk management, and he's an expert in the remote sensing as well. Next, I would like to call Dr. Mahesh, Urban Resilience Advisor, Coalition for Disaster Resilience Infrastructure, CDRI. Thank you, Dr. Mahesh, for joining us today. Dr. Mahesh has, again, more than 2 decades of experience of working and developing digital tools, training programs, frameworks for mainstreaming urban resilience. I would now next would like to call Aditya, Mr. Aditya Ragwar. He's the head government and policy South Asia Climate Group. Mr. Aditya has again worked he has more than a decade experience of working in the sustainable development sector and working with the working towards inclusive enterprises and all. I would now next would like to call Mr. Shishir Agarwal. He's a senior consultant, National Disaster Management Authority. Shishir again has been working with the MSMEs in the areas of finance. He was earlier with the bank, and he has closely seen the MSME challenges from the finance and policy perspective, and now working with the NDMA. I would now like to call Jhumki. Jhumki is basically the lead programs Partners in Change who will be moderating the session. And Jhumki has been working in the MSME sector and the ESG for the last couple of years. Thank you, Jhumki, for joining us. Over to you.
I think I'm audible, right? So thank you, Pavna. I think it's very interesting to name this thing a solution room. I feel right now MSMEs are struggling, and we see that happening every day. It's not just, it's climate, it's tariffs. I think it's important that actors like us come together along with academia, private sector, investment, financing to come out with certain solutions. Because I think the message is clear. Unless and until we have a resilient MSME, we cannot look at a resilient and sustainable economy. So from that, I think there's a lot of challenges that our MSMEs have shared, both from Surat as well as in Chennai. And this is only a small, I feel it's only a trailer of what is actually happening otherwise. Where, Raghav pointed out about climate risks and how it is not something that was distant, but is now being felt, right? And felt very closely home. So to take this discussion forward, I think I have a set of very distinguished experts here. Dr. Vidya Venugopal, Dr. Giriraj Abarnath, Dr. Mahesh, Aditya, and Shishir. And I feel that together they have much insights to offer that will help our MSMEs to build more resilience. So from that, I'll start with Dr. Vidya. So Dr. Vidya, you have worked extensively on occupational health and safety, and that is something that is coming out a lot, right? The impact. And Raghav also talked about how the MSMEs are struggling, the workforce, there's increased absenteeism, there is improper ventilation that is impacting, there's anyways high radiation, right? So from your perspective, what are the most scalable and low-cost measures MSMEs can adopt to safeguard themselves and their workers in this extreme heat?
Thank you very much for WRA for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure working with you all. To start with what kind of measures we can give, we have to understand the science a little bit. When you're talking about why workers' productivity is going down, or why, how their body reacts to heat, a little bit of understanding would kind of help where we can make the interventions. For example, when a worker's body gets heated up, I come from a science background, so I think for me to explain the science and then try and find controlled measures would be much more logical. When a worker's body gets exposed to heat, there is something that happens in the body. The way the body responds to heat is your core body temperature rises. It's like, having a fever. That's it. When you have an infection, you have a fever, and that's what happens in your body. But you don't feel the temperature outside, but it's inside the body that the temperature rises. When the internal temperature body rises, your body has to naturally cool itself. That's a natural defense mechanism, is to sweat. When you have to sweat, your blood has to go to the extremities to your skin. So that leaves less blood for your muscles and your brain. When you have less muscles, less blood to the muscles, or less blood to your brain, both are very bad signals for the worker. For less blood to the muscles means your performance endurance is going to go down, so the worker will not be able to perform in its full capacity. For if you have less blood to your brain, that impairs your cognition. That again reduces your concentration. It reduces alertness. This is science. This is how your body works. So we need to find solutions for something that can stop this from happening, right? So that's one thing. So what usually happens is worker starts to work at a certain pace, more like running a marathon where you run for distance in one speed, kind of slow down and then start again, which doesn't happen in these MSMEs. Just not MSMEs, any workplace for that matter, they have scheduled rest breaks for after 3 hours. But by the time your body temperature, internal body temperature has already gone to 2 degrees higher than what it's supposed to be, and the worker is not able to perform because of lack of blood in his muscles. So giving them breaks or cooling their bodies down in a manner that would reduce the pressure on your heart, because it has to work harder to send the blood to the muscles also. So those are the things that we need to kind of focus on. In a broader aspect, if you want to look at cooling solutions, like Raghav was telling earlier, capital investment is not the solution. But minimal investment that can give some passive cooling solutions, including, painting your roofs or having a cross ventilation happening. Simple things like, having wet clothes and simple cooling solutions where the worker is given the space and to pace himself, where your body temperature goes down, the workers, the insults that have happened because of the heat kind of goes down, then they start working later. So what we have done is why I'm telling it with so much evidence is we have been working in Central America and in India, in our own institute as well, working with workers, giving them 5 to 10 minutes break every hour. 5 to 10 minutes break every single hour. We have seen productivity go up, in fact. We have worked with brick workers, we have worked with commercial kitchen workers, asked them to take 5 to 10 minutes compulsory break every hour, and we have seen their productivity go up. So that's a win-win situation both for the workers' health plus also. What happens if we do not continue to do this, especially during peak summer, we see a lot of attrition and then people absenting themselves. That would affect the businesses anyway. So giving them cooling solutions like, electrolytes, in fact, because when you're sweating a lot, you also lose a lot of electrolyte. That also reduces your muscle performance. So these are all very simple solutions, doesn't require any capital cost at all. The second thing is large supply chain integration is what the next thing I would try to say. If there is an opportunity, when Veer Cherian sir was talking about, he says there are 700 industries together in Chennai who can work together. Some are large industries, some are small. The larger industries who are getting their parts from the smaller industries should be able to support, solar panels and everything. People, the workers having some place to rest during those 10 or 15 minutes that they are taking the rest really makes a big difference on the physiology of your body. So energy is a major issue. You cannot have air conditioners in every workplace, but cool cubicles, things like that. These all could be powered by solar panels, but can the larger industries support the smaller industries? Because anyway, they are going to be affected if their product quality is bad, especially when the workers' alertness is low or when the concentration is less. Accidents could happen, which could be even fatal. It has happened in many places. So what I would suggest is supply chain integration, larger companies working with the smaller companies, even as a CSR activity, could be something that could take something forward. Again, passive cooling solutions, or the way I think would be the future, the kind of building materials that you use, the kind of shielding that can be given for the workers, even giving them, especially those working with furnaces. We have worked with steel industries where we have given them simple vests that they could wear where their skin temperature would go down by 5 to 6 degrees. We have worked with commercial kitchens that makes a snack and everything. They are all MSMEs too. So we have clearly seen there is the abdomen is the area where all your organs are, and then there is a clear temperature reduction in all of these. These are all very simple solutions, which I think even a very low cost, poor MSME can afford to. So that's where I would stop before taking others to have questions.
Thank you, Dr. Venugopal. Thank you for actually engaging from a science point of view. I think it's important to look at the consequences, and only then interventions need to be designed. I think that's very key, and those are the words that I've actually taken. Thank you so much. Just moving on to Dr. Giriraj. Dr. Giriraj, you're an expert on floods. We have heard our colleague from, Mr. Vecherian talking about the floods that have actually engulfed Tamil Nadu in the recent times. Even in the recent couple of days, we saw Chennai actually being flooded, and that impacting the micro enterprises. So from your perspective, what are the local adaptation measures that could, one, show real impact for the MSMEs, and how can the coordination across various stakeholders ensure that those are more effective?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting to this panel, and congratulations to WRI for hosting this important session. I was a bit late here. I was in the plenary. I was seeing the crowd is missing, and I had seen all the crowds are here actually. So it was indeed a great session of green solution that was spoken by the plenary session there. So I think if we look at the Chennai flood, we are talking about a huge number when it comes to 10,000 MSME was impacted, a number of wage losses, direct damages to machineries, raw material or textile industry, and many other aspects have been well summarized by various research, including WRI has done a great job on that. Now, when we look at solutions, there are many available with us. And if you look at starting with the structural and non-structural solution, a non-structural solution is something where government, public, private sector has to come with a blended, scalable model. Often we lack that kind of a participatory approach. Why does the enterprise has to invest in local adaptation? Or why the public sector will think, I live in a very rural area in Chennai, where there is a school is there, and the local government is saying the school is making a lot of business, let the school construct the road. And the school says that, no, why should I construct the road? Because it belongs to the government property, right? So at the end, who is using it and what kind of code design approach has to be looked at? Learning curve has to be there, because the climate shock is something not going to go away very soon. And we are seeing the increasing frequency of flood. We are talking about flood, but there is also other sign of impact that is emerging is the water scarcity, right? So MSME also equally going to get impacted with the drinking water, quality of water, abstraction to groundwater recharge. All these industries required ample amount of water. So these are going to be looked at broadly in the coming years, a much more positioning of how MSME has to play an important role going forward. But now if you look at the solutions across India, only 3 to less than 10% of them are insured, MSME, right? So when you take floods like Chennai, I think the biggest gap is that many of them were not insured. They feel that let the flood comes, then we will see that. We don't worry until our houses get damaged. We only watch the neighbor houses get damaged. Okay, this year my house is not damaged. So that's not going to work out in the case of companies like small, medium or large scale companies. And then there are a lot of scalable models that are available. For example, you can develop, we develop for Satara district, an informal sector insurance product for tuk-tuk, fruit sellers, a kind of a small insurance product that can work for 500 rupees, right? It can cover an insured loss of about 10,000 to 8,000 rupees. So people have to invest and transfer the risk, and they cannot take it for granted that it's not going to impact for this year. It's going to strike each year in the coming years. And there are a lot of schemes that you can develop, like number of rainy days based insurance product, or provide some link with MFI, micro insurance linked with the banks and others. So there should be a kind of a good aggregations have to be developed, not necessarily that only one sector or an institution can solve this problem. I can give 2 examples. In the case of being our headquarters based in Sri Lanka, we mapped all the textile industries around the river basins in Kelening, and we looked at all the raw food producing companies. And you can develop an IoT based tower to tower coordination of 3 to 5 days flood forecasting skills, and you can tell to those MSME that shift all your raw materials at least 3 days in advance. Whether the flood will strike or not, you should have a principles of no regret approach. Many of them would not really adapt that no regret approach, thinking that let that strike comes and then we will take a risk. So that's not going to work in a kind of a food producing organization. If they are stored all the raw material and the river is overflowing, all that materials are going to be damaged and they are not insured. The other example we have looked at in the tea estate areas, where a lot of communities they cannot go to the job because the river is over flooded. And it just because the rivers are not maintained, cleaned well, the garbages are not removed. And we set up what we call is an action grant program, locally led climate champions. So these funds have to be more of an MSME funds. They have to provide a seed funds to those communities so that using the seasonal forecast or a short-term forecast, you could tell them that well in 2 to 3 months, you prepare, basically you anticipate, prepare and act and respond. So we need to go into 4 principles to make shock responsive MSME going forward. Otherwise, what we are going to think is that only one municipal or local ownership, local government cannot solve this problem. So if you provide some seed funds from the MSME and ensure that the community are well protected, because they are the one going to go for the workers to work with the MSME owners. So if you are not looking at safeguarding the nature, the health, the overall environment, we are fundamentally not bringing a risk layering approach. So this is where we need to come with a more systemic and holistic approach of thinking how the coordination of MSME governance have to work. And there are no ready-to-use models are available because it is location-specific. It is a state policy perspective, how the state ownership would bring some corpus point. And you know, some of you might know CSR here in India roughly invest about $1.4 billion, right? It's a huge number. So what are we doing with the locally led adaptations? So it looks at macro, very big number, but when you boil down to the individual communities who are well prone to landslides, where I was just watching news yesterday, the apple industry in Himachal is going to lose something about 7,000 crores, right? So the raw material doesn't go out of because the roads are damaged, the transport sector is disturbed in the hilly region. So we are going to see many similar examples. There are studies shows in India roughly about 10,000 landslide happens in an annual basis across the country. So is our infrastructure is resilience? I will leave to Uma Maheshwaran to speak more on resilient infrastructure from CDRA perspective. I think there is a lot more science-based approach has to be followed. And more important is whenever the IMD give a forecast of red, we believe that no rain is going to count, right? So yes, with increasing nature of reliability of accuracy, things have moved. I must say IMD have forecasted in April and in May that the monsoon is going to be above normal for August and September. Is it MSME are quite serious about that? How did they interpret? It's not just having a technical data. How do you translate that into an early action and pre-arranged financial tools are available to make sure your raw materials are better protected? And more importantly, learning from Chennai flood, the colleagues that have spoken, are we improving our infrastructure more resilient, right? So those are some of the points I would highlight. In the interest of time, I will come back if there is any additional response. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Giriraj. I think my takeaways are, I think I'll just talk about the words, the blended scalable models that we need to develop. And it's quite alarming to actually know that only 3 to 10% are insured. And of the MSMEs that are actually contributing so much to the GDP and employ probably 90% of the workforce. I think that's quite an alarming situation, and that really needs some immediate redressal. So moving on, I think it automatically goes to you, Dr. Mahesh. Infrastructure, like he stressed in his ending, is actually very key, right? So according to your perspective, what design and planning gaps in industrial and urban infrastructure, one, and how can MSMEs leverage resilient urban and industrial infrastructure to future-proof their operations against climate risk?
Thank you very much. Thanks to WRI for having me alongside some stalwarts in this field who have been working quite a bit on climate resilience. So pleasure being part of this panel, discussing about this important topic. How do we safeguard MSME sector and also in the process increase their productivity rather than decrease it because of emerging climate risks. When it comes to infrastructure resilience, of course, within CDRA, we talk about 2 aspects. One is resilient infrastructure and also resilience of infrastructure. So the first part talks about what we create, what we invest in, are they future-proof? Do they take into consideration some of these emerging risks into the early stages of design and planning? But most of the time, that that becomes very challenging for MSME because the cluster-based approach, or when you're developing a special economic zones, governments can come up with specific building bylaws, and that's the only way in which you can, do that at an early stage. But once the MSME cluster gets formed, it's very difficult to go and retrofit, especially for flux. Of course, you can do a lot more for heat by bringing in passive ventilation or even doing a cool roofing during operations or post building design and so on and so forth. But when it comes to flood, I think the building bylaws, especially for the special economic zones, need to be rethought through by the government, and certain basic things need to be proposed. For example, the plinth level. Change of plinth level is a very, very easy things. Having certain soft stories, so that the ground floor is used for parking rather than for holding the machineries. And also sometimes it's important giving this recommendation to the MSME clusters so they also think through while they are placing their machines. There are some machines which can take floodwaters for a few days, and there are some electronic equipments, where they don't basically they can't withstand water, or they need to be safeguarded differently. Also holding their battery or power unit, or their additional emergency power unit, where to place them. These are simple recommendations which can go in at an early stage of planning and design. The second part is whatever we do in terms of connectivity, in terms of the power availability. I think these things have to be thought through at a cluster level, and not at an individual operational level. And that's where it's getting more and more challenging, where the cluster or the MSME sector, they depend upon government to provide that, and government sometimes themselves they are still grappling with how to go about doing these kinds of risk assessments, because predominantly the risk assessments, even though it is done at a state level, national level, it doesn't go down to a community or a special economic zone level, and those risks are differential. For example, many a times talking about once in 500 return period floods, even though everybody understands that the flood will be 2 feet or probably 60 centimeters, whatever it is, that once in 500 year return period is not easily understood by an MSME, and they go about taking that risk. What is the cost of that investment or return on investment is something which needs to be very clearly brought up. I'll go to an example in Surat. In 2006, Surat experienced this huge flood. Right? And post-flood, especially in the textile industry, the water receded after weeks, and when that they made, they reported it back to conditions and extra flotation. But unfortunately, because of the floods, in 70 houses and OCC were flooded, and most of these migrant workers, they went back to the remote cutoff. And just I was an extreme flood, and that led to plague. So fearing that there will be a plague, these workers did not come back for 3 months. And what that led to was, and this happened during tail end of the monsoon, which was August, September. So it was also the Diwali period. They had more orders on their books, but they couldn't deliver on the orders because the workers were not there. So it is not only the flood affecting the equipments or affecting the infrastructure, it is also how the workers, how do you communicate information to the workers. And when COVID happened, what the MSME sector did was they made sure that they had special buses for the workers, they had special food services, and they made them comfortable so that they don't go back. Of course, some of them did leave, but they were able to retain majority of them so that the work continued. This is something which one needs to take into consideration. It is how we communicate some of this risk. I think the previous speaker didn't mention about it. And we need to also see to it how early warning information is also delivered to them. And finally, a last piece of advice, I think going back to the lack of insurance, I think right now India is also progressively experimenting with various aspects of insurance. I think parametric insurance is something which have been tried and tested, at least in Ahmedabad, within Seva. Mahila Housing Trust does it for women workers. I think that's something which is slowly emerging. I think that parametric insurance, while it is for people, we can also think about certain new innovative products for their buildings and equipment, so that even though they don't have to give a huge upfront cost, I think it's paying that early premium is a big challenge, given the small profit margins which these sectors operate with. Maybe looking at that early cost is paid in parts, or early cost is not taken off, but the government bears the early cost, but the workers or the MSME sector then pays the cost of the insurance once the event happens, something of that nature. So they are somewhat safeguarded, or at least they have the working capital made available to them immediately post a disaster for them to start operating. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahesh. I think it reiterates the points the last speakers also talked about, one about simple solutions, I think, and the other about early stage designing, and the fact that the MSMEs need to preempt what could actually happen and design like that, and design as a cluster and as opposed to a individual, because that will then lead to sharing of the costs. I think that's, and in the end, are we innovative products for insurance? I think those are my key takeaways from here. So going to Aditya. Aditya, you have been working with industry groups and have actually, recently published a report in building climate resilience for Indian industries. So from your perspective and what the other speakers have been also talking about, that what are the most common blind spots that the MSMEs are not really, assessing when it comes to climate? And what practical steps then the MSMEs can take to ensure that they're able to embed resilience at the core of their business strategies? So yeah, thank you.
First of all, thanks to WRI for having me here. And I think, the advantage of going later in a panel is all the good ideas have already been put out. So now I just have to reference back. Iski to baat ho gayi. But I really do think, you're talking about, and perhaps slightly take a different tangent to the questions you've asked. We know what problems the MSMEs face: lack of information, lack of awareness, right? And inadequate data hai, dependence on old technologies, although that's not completely their fault, right? Like that's also a financial issue, and there's a lack of access to technology issue. All of these things we know exist, but as Raghav also pointed out earlier, in Surat, the textile industry, break-even points are rising. So now it's just, let's be very honest, India, I think, has generally not evolved to the point where climate is the first or within the top 5 issues as a lens, right? It's fairly low. That's just the way it is. So business continuity is the first question they have to answer. Now, I think, therefore, a lot of MSMEs, especially the ones that are here today, at least the representatives, are fairly well aware of what they can and cannot do. They are perhaps being hindered by lack of access to finance, right? So things like parametric insurance is definitely something. Also looking at cluster levels. So that is a real sort of a thing that they have to consider. Don't think of the problem within your factory, but think of the problem as in my cluster, what's the issue, what's the challenge my cluster faces, and therefore how do we implement it? Because then the cost gets divided by, hopefully across the board. But there are more systemic issues, I think, that we face. The systemic issues are India needs to invest more in weather forecasting. We need to develop better satellite capacities. We need to develop better, we are doing better this time, as you pointed out, but that needs to happen. It's easy to say why, ask the question, what are the challenges MSMEs face in building, integrating climate risk into consideration, but do large corporates in India do it any more successfully, other than a handful of examples that perhaps most people in this room already know. So all of these are issues that we, I think, have to start saying that there needs to be an enabling ecosystem instead for MSMEs to become aware, understand what the core issues are, and then be able to act on them. In that sense, WRN and other organizations, CSOs in the space are doing a lot of great work. RISE is a great idea, right? You're building awareness, but awareness only goes so far. So who else needs to come into play? Financial institutions need to come into play. National government needs to come into play, but so does state government, right? Then the larger corporates, the MSME clusters who might be a part of their supply chain need to come into play. And I think that's really some of the core issues that you need to figure out. India has taken some right steps, right? Recently, we know that India is working on the climate adaptation plan. Good. Okay, so but how does this climate adaptation plan translate downward to the lowest level, right? How does it not be just a national adaptation plan, but a state adaptation plan, for a district adaptation plan, municipality, TESE? When you break it down to that level is when you will be able to explain to an MSME who's more concerned with the smaller universe that they see day to day. Then they will be able to answer his questions. In terms of actual solutions, yes, I definitely agree with the fact that, retrofitting from an industry perspective is very, very expensive. And thankfully, I think over the last 2-3 years, I've seen this opinion die down a bit. But there used to be a common suggestion given out that if there is a flood, factory should, if there's been a flood, next time raise the shop floor. Do you know how expensive that is? And even at an MSME level, that's a very expensive ask. You can't just do it. So instead of retrofitting, how do we, when we're developing new SEZs, when we're developing new MSME clusters, there are investments going into these areas. But how do you ensure that they're done in a climate resilient fashion? There are MSME schemes like the MSE Spice, MSME Gift that are, sort of encouraging MSMEs to take cleaner tech adoption, do more resource efficient production, things like that. But how do you make release of funds perhaps contingent on also adopting climate resilient things, right? Gati Shakti is the overarching scheme of the government that, a lot of the states are also implementing. Can a certain percentage of Gati Shakti funds be tied to building climate resilient infrastructure? Now that's an unlock at a larger scale, right? And now you're talking about now there are funds available for these kind of things. Other than that, I think all the regular day-to-day things, I think a lot of companies are already, MSMEs to the extent that they can are trying. They are definitely more aware that the heat is an issue, flood is an issue, and they are doing the best that they can. I think some of the larger industries have also began to do a bit more innovative things where a lot of them have a lot of heat risk plans, heat risk policies. There was a company who I cannot name, but they mentioned they were trialing flood drills. So like how they have fire drills, they were trialing flood drills because they were in an area, certain locations were in areas that were flood prone. So they're like, what happens in the case of a flood? There needs to be a flood drill, which is really interesting to think about. But how does some of those things that only companies with the financial means to do so, how does that information get passed on down? Because at the end of the day, a large corporate will worry about doing these in-depth climate risk assessments, forecasts, and believe me, a lot of them, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, a lot of large companies are investing into this, and they're investing a lot of money. But let's also be clear, they're doing it for the money that, for their factories across the thing. How do you take what they've already tried, tested, learned, and how does the government then come in to deploy it downwards, right? To, upstream, downstream supply chains. Therefore, then you start building, actually, I think you really start helping, MSMEs take action and, move more towards implementation rather than just, doing a theoretical thought exercise that, yes, this would, work. So I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Aditya. My key takeaway from this is that, the line that he said, we are talking about MSMEs, but the larger companies themselves are not doing it. Right, while they have the investment, the money with themselves, but they're still not doing it. And we only have very early starters or early examples across. I think this goes into my last question, and it actually refers to investment, right? I think everybody has been talking about investment. We've been talking about seed funding that Dr. Giriraj talked about. Then we're also talking about, the need like parametric insurance and other innovative products that could come about. So even while all of this kind of exists, why, Shishi, do you think that the MSMEs continue to remain outside this mechanism? And what are the other innovative financial instruments that could actually help MSMEs build their resilience? So, yeah, over to you.
Thank you, Jumki, and thank you, Bhavna. And I really appreciate WRI's attempt to, talk about MSMEs. When we talk about the disasters, we talk about floods, heat. Normally, what I have seen from my experience in the last 2-3 years, MSMEs were never talked about. We were talking about agriculture, we were talking about the people, livelihoods. But yes, MSMEs are a very important sector. And you said about like the things are in place. So while you were presenting, you talked about strategic placement of exhaust fans. Okay, so exhaust fans are there, but why we talk about the strategic placement? Because you have to place them at places where they can vent off the heat outside. So this actually applies to the insurance mechanisms or the finance mechanisms of India also. We have to be strategically innovate the products for MSMEs. So we need to understand that when we talk about the MSMEs, it's not like there are 3 categories of MSMEs: micro, small, and medium. So micros are the turnover which is less than 5 crores. Then medium turnover less than 50 crores, and small turnover less than 50 crores, and medium less than 250 crores. So they all are not the same. It's not the one size fits all that you create a policy applicable to all the MSMEs altogether. Secondly, as Mahesh talked about the working capital thing, there could be 2 kinds of losses. One is the productivity loss an MSME can face. Second, it's the working capital disruption. For example, extreme floods happens and your stocks. I personally noticed that many of the MSMEs units, I was actually in SBI earlier, and I used to work in the MSME financing. So they used to have basements and they used to have stocks put in the basements. So in an extreme flood situation, the water seeps in and your stocks actually gets damaged. So what happens, it's not only the cost of the stocks, it's the working capital cycle that is getting disrupted. Because again, you have to start from the scratch. So what happens, the immediate loss you can cover is for the stocks, but the working capital is also very important. So insurance companies, they can come up with a hybrid kind of product in which there is a parametric component attached to it. When we talk about the parametric, so many of us know, but many of us don't know that parametric is a solution in which the claim is paid on the certain parameters. There is no concept of indemnity there. The traditional insurance we used to buy, like the car insurance, it works on the indemnifier model. But the parametric insurance works on the parameters. For example, if the rainfall crosses 100 mm, so the claim is released to the insured. So that helps in the swift payment of the claims. So for the working capital, because if a flood happens, everybody knows that, okay, the work or the operations of the unit will get stopped. So you can release the immediate working capital leads to the institution. Whereas the actual loss of the goods or the stocks, you can indemnify. You can inspect later on and you can pay to the institutions. So this is one thing. Secondly, if we talk about the NDMA point of view, because I am working with NDMA for the last 3-4 years, so I can tell you that we are working on innovative parametric models. We are also working on different insurance mechanisms, that how we can help the communities. And already technical assistance from Asian Development Bank is there, which is approved by the Ministry of the Economic Affairs. It's a 1.5 million USD proposal in which we are planning to run a pilot in 3 states, Kerala, Karnataka, and Maharashtra. And we are working on the not just the like agriculture, MSME, and livelihoods. 3 components we are working on. As Mahesh pointed out, Seva model. So we are also roping in the SHGs because they have a different kind of mindset and they also have innovative mechanisms in place. Seva model is quite good, I feel, and it's to be appreciated. But again, it has to be scaled up with certain refinements to it. Because the triggers, when you talk about the parameters, what happens, sometimes you may get a claim, but you are not suffering a loss. But again, it's a vice versa thing. You may suffer a loss, but you may not get a claim. So the parameters are to be set with a lot of complexities and a lot of brains putting into it. So that's my take for this and anything else you want to ask.
Will you sign for the ask question? Yeah. I just didn't have the mic speak.
Just if you had just one recommendation for MSME, and that could be from the lens of the worker, the enterprise, or the infrastructure, or the financial, what would that be for ensuring that the MSMEs are able to build more climate resilient?
So from me, because I again come from a banking side and also from a policy side, I do feel that insurance penetration in India is very much required. As you have already talked about, it's less than 4% in India, general insurance penetration in India. MSMEs being the backbone of the country, employing so many people, it's not just about losses, it's about livelihoods also. So we need to, insurance companies, they also need to come forward. We need to create some innovative products. At a policy level, as you suggested that a hand-holding could be there, like Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana is one example in which government is providing subsidies to the farmer to encourage to buy insurance policies. So same we can do for the MSME also, we can provide a subsidy kind of support, but it's a hand-holding thing. It's not forever, but for starting 1 or 2 years to raise the awareness and to motivate them to purchase insurance and buy insurance for themselves. So this is my 2 cents on this. Thank you.
What is one practical solution?
Practical solution would be, I think MSMEs, in addition to thinking about your flood and this thing and directly perhaps addressing them that, we need to build flood water systems and things like that. There is also a certain resilience that can be brought out by leveraging already existing schemes that promote clean energy technologies, right? Switching to renewables takes your reliance on grid to a certain extent, it reduces it. And as floods and all these events tend to happen, if the grid failure happens, but at least you have renewables to back up on, right? Like, so that's just a very company-oriented, cluster-oriented thing that, try and figure out what clean energy or low carbon switches will also in some ways make your business resilient to whether it be a flood or, heat or any of these others.
Thank you, Jitan.
Thank you. So I have one recommendation for the clusters, that is MSME clusters, that is the cooling shelter. NDMA has the guideline recently launched for cooling shelters. So if any organization is looking for providing that respite, a longer respite, but more safer respite for heat, I think please check out the guidelines by NDMA. It was co-developed with CDRI, so there is a vested interest in me promoter here. But it is done by a group of practitioners, so it's well thought about what's come out, and it may be useful to setting it up within the SEZs. Second, for SEZs, risk pooling, I think that's a wonderful mechanism. Do think about it. At least associations, industry associations together can work with the government in coming up with a risk pooling mechanism, which can be much more useful. And 3, these are for the banks. I think that whatever interest rate +1, I think that additionality of +1% can be charged for or can be leveraged in some other form to ensure that resilience measures are incorporated or climate sensitivity is incorporated as part of the loan package. I think that will be a wonderful way to safeguard the investment which is rolled out by the banks, and at the same time it will also put a little bit of a pressure on industry to actually carry out some measures. So it will be a win-win situation in the long run.
I would again come back from the health resilience for the workforce. When we're talking about workforce in MSMEs, MSMEs are largely reliant on manual labor. And so we definitely may need to make sure that you're health resilient. One of the things I would say is again, I'll come back to the cluster mechanism, industries cluster mechanism, where heat, for example, a person does not get a heat stroke right away. There is a pathway to that. And if we can actually, it kind of intervene in between, then the worker can be actually saved. The first thing I would say is about health communication. making the worker recognize the signs and symptoms of his own HRI, that means where heat-related illnesses or symptoms, where he knows that this is what he's undergoing, and then he can stop or pace his work, kind of rest or cool himself or drink water or whatever it is, so that, it does not progress to heat stroke or other issues. But just in case this worker does not recognize it and he progresses, or these MSMEs are ready to take this worker to the nearby hospital or something. So that kind of preparedness is also not there. So these clusters could actually help in doing all of this. So like I said, we are losing about 91% of workers in MSMEs, about 259 million workers, I think. 91% of them, from our own studies and from statistics I'm saying, have complained or reported that they have been affected by heat-related illnesses. So that's like a staggering number. And we are losing $325 billion annually, USD. $325 billion USD annually because of heat-related issues. So that's something like not good for the economy also. And mostly what happens is when it comes to MSMEs, out-of-pocket expenses are very high for these MSMEs. So we are making these people much poorer. So things have to be taken, looked at that angle, the human side of heat. Thank you.
So as Aditya mentioned, now talking in the last is also lack of ideas. So I agree with whatever all has been said, but I would say that this is a leapfrog in which what we are bringing the climate resilience into the MSME. Probably it would be good to establish a multi-stakeholder partnership or a dialogue for a MSME sector, because I think at the end of the day, ministry has to come with a policy decision on how do we mainstream this platform, because all these golden ideas can be layered within the platform. And then because we are talking about 6.3 crore MSME, we are not talking about one or two, it's a big number. How are we going to help? So it might be, we need a clear roadmap. Maybe WRI can work and lead that efforts so that other partners can also join force. Because there is a lack of capacity, like somebody spoken about data. So how can we channel the IMD data to the one technological pillar and provide more directions to MSME, 3 to 5 days of forecast, early warning skills, what they need to prepare, involvement of urban rural development ministry, and then the coming up with a broader risk governance framework that would really leapfrog the climate resilience framework in the coming years, because we are seeing each year disasters in different form, and there is no part of the country we can say that it is less prone to drought or disasters like flood or landslide. So it is better to be prepared rather than being more reactive, which we always see. Reactive approaches comes very visible than the proactive approaches. So let's take a call on how we strengthen this kind of a dialogue in a more formalized and policy-oriented mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I have the toughest job here with so much to kind of process from you as well, and to put this together. So I don't know whether I'll be able to do justice to everybody, but I think some of the points that I've actually taken from this is, one is that I think we need to understand the context. Contextualization is the key, whether it comes to money, infrastructure, whether it comes to floods, resilience, whether it comes to heat. I think it's contextualization is very important, right? The way people feel heat or floods in Chennai is very different from the way it is felt in Surat. So I think that is one that is key. I feel, and the solutions are not always require a huge investment. While investment is needed, and it is very critical when you want to build a resilient economy with resilient MSME sector. However, there are also simple solutions that can be adopted. And that would require everybody to come together. And what everybody has been talking about is a cluster level approach or an integrated approach that could enable sharing of cost, sharing of knowledge. And we've seen how that could actually work. So I think that is one thing for me. Another, I think, key takeaway is that there is a need for knowledge to come from the top to the bottom. I think the percolation is very important, because a lot of things are happening with the brands. The brands need to communicate it to the suppliers, and the suppliers then need to communicate it to their value chain. I think that is very key. And only then the entire value chain will look very clean and will look green in that sense. I think also with regard to, finances, what is very important and is that we cannot adopt a one-size-fit-all approach, right? It needs to be very contextually designed. Like I also said, it has to be for micro LSMEs, it has to be very different from what it looks for small and medium enterprises, right? Today they're facing challenges together, but the challenges that they face at the individual level are very different. So those need to be actually taken into account. And only then I think what Dr. here has also been able to say that we'll be able to save the millions and billions of dollars that we are losing because of the flood and the climate. And we see right now Punjab actually reeling under it. We've seen how many enterprises have vanished in Uttarakhand and Himachal area just because of that. So I think only when we are able to build a resilient MSME structure, we'll be able to see a much resilient Indian economy as well for me. So thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Anand, and thank you, Bhavna.
Thanks a lot to all our extremely distinguished panelists, our previous speakers. If I may just call on all of you for a group photo. So,
this cross daddy.
yeah, I do not want to stand between you and your lunch, which is downstairs, but all our speakers are around. So if you have questions, please catch hold of them, have conversations, and have a lovely Connect Karo 2025.